Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg and I am here today to do my standard Friday Reads video where I film a video about the things that I've read this week, any bookish things that have been going on, and I film it on a Friday and I post it on a Saturday. It's just the weird way that I do things. It's an odd day to be doing a Friday Reads because not long before I started filming this, or about an hour before I started filming this, news broke that Salman Rushdie was stabbed. In the beginning, there was a lot of confusion. Reports said he may have been stabbed, he may have been punched. It seems confirmed now that he has been stabbed. I saw a report that he was stabbed in the neck. This is obviously very disconcerting, upsetting news. Salman Rushdie is an author who has had a fatwa declared against him for 30 years. It was in 1989, I believe, when the Satanic Verses was published. I have a copy that I have not ever gotten around to reading. This might be a good inspiration to pick this up. I saw Good Neighbor Books, which is the bookstore that I ordered a curated book box from back in April, is located not far from where the literary festival where this happened is, and they had posted that this is why you should read banned books, because you can't allow people to scare you away from topics or ideas. You should engage with them, and if somebody's telling you to stay away from something, maybe that's a sign that it is something that should be held up and gotten into the hands of more people. I have not read the Satanic Verses. I did read Midnight's Children in high school, and I remember really loving it, but I don't remember a lot of the details. The only thing that really stuck in my mind about this book, which is a really odd detail, is that at one point someone has a drop of blood fall from their nose and it turns into a ruby before it hits the ground. I don't know why that detail has stuck in my head so thoroughly ever since I was in high school, but it really has. But I remember really liking this book, so at some point I would like to revisit it. By the way, I did a bookshelf tour earlier this week, which I had really not expected that I would do. And in that, I mentioned that for a while I was really in love with these editions of books. Penguin, around the year 2000, did a series called The Penguin Great Books of the 20th Century. Now, obviously, that list was really curated by what they had access to and were able to reprint, but they are just beautiful editions, and this is actually one of them. I don't know if you can see the illustration, but it's a beautiful edition of the book. And it's just really difficult. It's particularly difficult because since news only broke about an hour ago, we don't really have any details at the time I'm filming this. We can make assumptions about why someone would have attacked Salman Rushdie, but the person was, I believe, taken into custody. But I had to stop following the news so closely because, like, cell phone footage of people who captured the people rushing to help Salman Rushdie, and there was even a footage of him being taken on the stretcher to the helicopter that took him to a hospital. It really upsets me, so I can't engage with it too much. So I need to not follow it that closely anymore, and I'll just keep checking for updates about his condition. It's easy to focus on our current situation and say this is a really particularly difficult or violent time and things have become weaponized. Obviously, things have been that way for a very long time. As I said, the fatwa was declared in 1989 when the Satanic Verses was published, and Salman Rushdie had to be in hiding for a very long time. So this is not a new thing by any means or any stretch of the imagination. And it's not a new idea, but it is uncomfortable. And given how toxic the news cycle has been for such a long time, and how, if you are in the United States, you feel on edge about the insurrection on January 6th and the Unite the Right rally in 2017, which resulted in the death of a counter-protester, which I talked about in my Pulitzer Prize deep dive about less. It's really easy to just feel unsettled, and particularly, again, given that this year a lot of conversations about banning books and keeping books from bookshelves has really become weaponized. It's just scary and difficult. I don't know all that much about Salman Rushdie. I have seen some interviews where I wasn't really sure how he came across personally, and some of his books I have not been entirely interested in reading. I do actually have a book that he edited. Hold on one second, let me grab it. If you watched my bookshelf tour from earlier in the week, you may know that the bookshelf that's over here out of frame, on top of it I have older copies of books and signed versions of some books. So there was no reason to highlight it at the time I did it, but I have the Best American Short Stories from 2008, which Salman Rushdie edited, and it was signed by him. I did not actually meet Salman Rushdie. Someone got this for me and gave it to me for, I think, Christmas. And I have it up there. So, you know, it's just a really difficult, kind of scary time in general. And I hope he's okay. I was saying, based on some interviews of his, I don't know how I would feel about him personally, but you know, I don't have to sit down and have coffee with him if I'm going to read one of his books. And I do think that a lot of his work, these two books in particular, are quote unquote important literary works that a lot of people should read. And I have read Midnight's Children, but I read it as a teenager who didn't know a whole lot about the world. So I think if I read it now, I would probably have a lot more context to bring into this book and not focus so hard on the visuals. Like, I think there's a reason that bit about the blood drop turning into a ruby is what I really remember about this book. And a lot of the other stuff has faded a bit from memory. And I really do need to read this book. I've been saying that I want to read it for a very long time, and I just never have gotten around to it. It happens a lot. I purchased this copy about 20 years ago. No, it had to be more recent than that because it still has its sticker from Borders. I worked at Borders, so this is like an artifact for me that I would love to keep on my book. I know most people would pull off the stickers from their book, and I did when I worked there for the most part. But some of them slipped by me, and now I love stumbling across them. So this came from Borders store number 127, which was the first Borders that I worked at, which actually closed in 2005. And there's a date on it, which is when it arrived in the store. And that is January 17th, 2005. So I purchased this in January, sometime after 2005. The store closed later that year, so the window's a little bit small. I would have purchased it in the first half of 2005. I've had it that long, and I haven't read it. It also is handy to have the sticker from that perspective, because it helps me narrow down how long I've had this book. But anyway, I'm rambling because, as I said, the news it's very upsetting, and the images were very upsetting. And I wish there was an update or like a narrative, like a beginning and an ending to this story, but it's happening right now, and we'll see how it goes. Hopefully he will be okay. It sounded like he was stabilized when they moved him to the hospital, and we'll see. If you have thoughts about Salman Rushdie's works, recommendations for where to start for people, let us all know in the comment section down below. I'm assuming the answer is always going to be the Satanic verses, always, because that is the major work that it's what got him banned and sent him into exile for a long time. He wrote a memoir called Joseph Anton, and Joseph Anton is the name that he had to use while he was in hiding. So he's a very interesting figure, and regardless of whatever he would be like in his personal life. And I know I am someone who occasionally has difficulty separating the person from the work because the person filters into the work. But in this case, I think there's really no denying how important his contribution to literature has been. And I hope he's okay. He's 75, so any kind of physical assault is not a good thing. Hopefully he'll be okay. And before we get into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video, I have a couple of quick things, or hopefully quick things, I would like to say. Every time I say something's going to be quick, I end up spending a lot of time talking about it, so we'll see. Today, meaning Friday, as I am filming this, I posted my Pulitzer Prize deep dive of Less by Andrew Sean Greer, and the comments on it have been really interesting and fascinating already. I'm going to link it down below if you haven't seen it, because again, it really just posted. And it's one of the things I really love about this Pulitzer Prize project. I wanted to do it not just to say that I have read all of the books that have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction. I didn't want to do it just to say that I've done it. I wanted to do this project because to me it's fascinating. I think going through and seeing what books have won the Pulitzer Prize for fiction and what books did not win the Pulitzer Prize for fiction is a really interesting thing. And I wanted to not just read the books, but see what each of them means, particularly given the Pulitzer's mandate that it is supposed to go to an American author, preferably for something that deals with American life. And I think how they choose to interpret that in each year says something about where America was at that time. And I also think what they choose not to award the prize to also says something. And I think part of the discussion about Les that I didn't really get into is that I really think Salvage the Bones by Jesmyn Ward should have won that year. Spoiler for the entire video about Les. And someone else commented, and in the video I said that I feel like it is inevitable that Jesmyn Ward will win a Pulitzer Prize for fiction at some point. And given that she has now been snubbed twice, once for Salvage the Bones and once for Sing Unburied Sing, it feels like as long as her next book lands, it probably makes it even more inevitable. But the truth is, especially given the context of an earlier conversation I had in that video about how it seems that a lot of works by minority writers and Black women in particular have a really hard time getting noticed. And I don't think any individual jury or board for the Pulitzer has intentionally meant to do this, but I think when you have situations where Sing Unburied Sing doesn't even land on the finalist list and The Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois doesn't land on the finalist list, you start to wonder, what does a Black woman have to do to get noticed by the Pulitzer board? And I think it'll be really interesting to see how that conversation goes, and I've just been thinking about that as well. Another thing I wanted to quickly talk about, and again, quickly could mean nothing, is that Brian over at Bookish did a series of fascinating videos, and I don't think it was intended to be a series, but it became a series. The first one is he did a video about tips for people who might want to have a booktube channel or have recently started one, and it was an interesting video. I still need to do my own video for that, by the way. I have all of my notes somewhere, and I've completely gotten away from it, but I want to revisit it at some point. He did a follow-up to that video because someone asked, as someone who does not have a channel, what are things that people who follow BookTube can do to support the channels that they like? So he did a video about that, and then Steve Donahue did a response that was kind of cranky. And in that video, one of the things that Steve railed against was the idea of monetizing your channel, saying it's not something you should do. If you monetize your channel, you are degrading yourself. I didn't watch Steve's video. I just watched the video that Brian did in response to Steve's video. And I think Brian did a really good job explaining what he actually was saying in his video, which I thought was apparent, and why you shouldn't judge someone who monetizes the channel because you don't know their finances. And I haven't really talked about that. Obviously, I am someone, or maybe not obviously, but I do monetize my channel. And a big reason for that is that this frequently feels like a part-time job. And I already have a full-time job, and my full-time job is very chaotic. I don't really know what my days are going to look like. So I usually aim to film a video in the morning before I start my day with work. But because I am on Mountain Time, my boss is on Pacific Time, and we have a lot of clients who are on the East Coast, my day is very erratic. Today is a great example of that because I wanted to film this before I started my day, but we have a client on the East Coast who's trying to finalize a situation before the weekend. So I ended up working instead, and now I'm filming this during what should be my lunch break. So I already have a full-time job. My full-time job is very chaotic and stressful, but I try to film 3 videos a week. One of those is a Friday Reads video because I do that every week, but I try to do 3 videos a week. Nobody is making me do that. I do it because I love it. I do it because I want a creative outlet to talk about books, and that's why I end every video saying thank you if you follow along or if you took the time to watch any of my videos or comment on any of my videos. And I really do mean that. I appreciate that because that is the thing that makes it worth all of the headaches to get something filmed and edited and uploaded. It wouldn't feel like it was worth it without that community component. So that's why I really do it. But the monetization really does help. And I don't think anybody who monetizes their channel owes anyone an explanation for what they're going to do with that money. Sometimes people will offer just like a vague example of what they might use it for. I don't think you have to explain yourself. If you are putting the work in, you have the right to monetize your channel. As Brian points out, YouTube is going to be putting ads on anyway. You might as well get a cut of the profit. So for me, every time I make money from YouTube, Joel and I take that money and immediately put it into a savings account. And that savings account is our vacation fund. I have mentioned that Joel and I are going to Italy at the end of September. We'll be there for 2 weeks. And YouTube is helping fund that. This is a trip that we have wanted to do for over a decade, and that is no exaggeration. After we bought the tickets earlier this year, and by the way, thank goodness we bought our tickets early because they were really cheap in the beginning of the year, and they're really expensive right now. So we got lucky on that. But Joel had got a memory from some social app where in 2011 or early 2012, he mentioned to someone that we were planning to go to Italy that fall. Obviously, that didn't happen. It didn't happen for a lot of different reasons. We ended up getting engaged and planning a wedding and then getting married. And then right after we got married, we moved to Montana. And many things have happened in the intervening years. We became foster parents. So there are a lot of reasons, some of them financial, some of them personal, for why we have not managed to make this trip over the last decade. But we're finally doing it. And everyone watching right now is helping that. Because again, every time I make money from YouTube, it goes into that savings account that is our vacation fund. It is not funding the entire trip, but it is definitely helping. And it certainly helped make it possible. And again, that is why I always try to end a video by saying thank you, because it means a lot. And it is definitely something that keeps me going in this. So I really just wanted to say that. And I'm not trying to really insert myself into the conversation about monetizing, but I wanted to just take this moment to let you know what it means, because I don't think we would have really been able to do this trip without monetizing the channel. So thank you. It really means a lot. We've been wanting to do this for a very long time. I've been talking for a long time already. So really quickly, before we get into the Friday reads, I would also say we finished the TV show Hacks. There will be another season next year, but we're caught up to where it was. Really interesting show. Should not work because the characters can be really annoying, but somehow it's a great show. It's hilarious. I don't think I've laughed that hard watching a show in a really long time. It's hilarious. So if you haven't watched it, I would actually recommend it. Just know that the people are toxic. They make a lot of bad decisions. They do a lot of bad things, but it's hilarious. The thing that makes me feel old is it has the actor who played Justin on Ugly Betty. Justin was Betty's high school age nephew, if you watched Ugly Betty. So he's a kid. He's 28 years old now and he has a goatee. Every time he appears on screen, it's like, oh my God, he should be a baby. What is happening? So anyway, with that, let's move into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. I'm just going to move less away. I only actually finished one book this week, and that is Mercury Pictures Presents by Anthony Marra. I had been really looking forward to this book. It was one of my most anticipated books for the second half of the year, because I really like the Oscars and I love old Hollywood and movies and all of that stuff. And this is centered obviously about a movie studio in the lead up to World War II. I didn't quite know what it was about, so it was a little bit of a surprise when I did start. I finished it. It's fine. It's just fine. I can't really recommend it, but it wasn't bad. So I think there's a good book in here, but there's too much going on, ultimately. There are too many characters, too many storylines, and ultimately, Anthony Marra can't manage all of them to say anything. And ultimately, there's only really one or two characters that are interesting. So initially, it starts out really promising because you have this woman, Maria Lagana, who has gotten a job at Mercury Pictures and quickly risen through the ranks to become the sort of right hand of the studio head. Because she was born in Italy and she has experience with the fascist government and censorship and all of that stuff. Those are skills that end up being really useful in Hollywood, especially with Hollywood fighting censorship. And it becomes even more useful as Hollywood starts to move into World War II and struggle with international relations as a result of World War II. Her father was a defense attorney in Italy who ran afoul of Mussolini's government and became censured by it. So Maria and her mother ended up immigrating to the United States. Her story could have been fascinating, especially since she is dating a man named Eddie Liu, who is an American, but he is of Chinese descent. And he is a great actor, but he can't get good roles in anything because no one is willing to cast a man of Chinese descent in a leading role. If the book was just about her and Eddie, it would be fascinating. The problem is it keeps fanning out as it goes, and you meet more characters, and you end up spending so much time away from Maria that her story doesn't end up having all that much of an impact, at least not for me. But it's interesting how these characters end up moving into World War II, especially Eddie, because he ends up getting really great acting opportunities and financial opportunities because of World War II. But it involves selling his soul a bit because he needs to play Japanese villains that are framed in extremely racist ways because Mercury Pictures, like other studios, gets involved in war propaganda. They want to get American audiences amped up to go fight in World War II, so they really frame Japanese people in bad ways. And Eddie Liu is not Japanese, but it's an opportunity for him to get these roles and make a lot of money. So that could have been interesting, but it's not the whole entirety of the book. And Anthony Marra will start to say something interesting, and then he'll either leave it unexplored and move on to the next thing, or worse, he'll resort to cliches in order to sort of just put it away and move on to the next thing. And that's just, it doesn't really work. And none of the other characters are anywhere near as interesting as Maria and Eddie. And I think part of this is that I listened to this on audio. And the narrator does a lot of voices and accents, and I didn't really like it. And as someone whose mother's side of the family is all Italian American, like they all immigrated from Italy, I always struggle when somebody does a really hard Italian accent and the narrator goes in very hard on the Italian accent, and I wanted to die inside every time. So that probably really didn't help, but I don't think any of the characters are interesting. And a lot of the places the story goes, it doesn't feel fully formed. Ultimately, there's just too much in the book. It doesn't have any focus. And that's a shame because I think it could have been a good book if it had just tightened up and focused on Maria and Eddie and their story. Because the other thing that's really interesting about them is that they are people who are caught up in history, but they're living it out in real time. And sometimes the tide of history will keep you from an opportunity that you should have otherwise had. Sometimes it will end up throwing you an opportunity that you might otherwise not have had. And sometimes you can bend the tide to your own will. That could have been an interesting book, but I don't think it's what we end up getting. And that's a shame because it ends up just kind of being a nothing burger of a book to me. I have come very close to finishing another book, and that is The Day the World Came to Town, 9/11 in Gander, Newfoundland by Jim DeFede. I actually don't know how to pronounce his name. The reason I have been fitting this book in this week is that Joel and I are actually going to Spokane this weekend to see the musical that was adapted from this book, which is called Come From Away. And I really wanted to read the book before we went and did that. And I in typical me style, waited right until the last minute and finally got it in. I have about an hour left in the audio, so I should manage to finish it tonight. It's a really good book. 9/11 is something that will immediately hit me emotionally. So there are parts of this book where they'll just be glancingly talking about something that happened on 9/11, and I just immediately want to cry. It's very emotional. And I think that also makes me very sensitive to books that use 9/11 as a framing device or a plot device or anything like that, because if it's done in a way that feels manipulative, I get very upset. But this is a really good book. So basically, if you're unfamiliar, on 9/11, there were a lot of planes in the air, and the United States shut down air travel because of what went on, for obvious reasons. So a lot of the planes that were supposed to be going to the United States ended up with nowhere to go, and they had to land because, for obvious reasons. So a lot of planes ended up getting directed to Gander, which is a town that had just happened to have a really large airstrip because it used to be a hub in the days before planes could really make the journey without stopping. It's a very small town. The population basically doubled while people were there, and they were stranded for days because the United States left airspace closed for a very long time. And it's about how the community came together to support all of these people, many of whom were emotionally devastated. There were people there's a woman who doesn't know where her son is. Her son was a first responder, and her family has not been able to get in touch. She doesn't know what's going on, and she isn't there to do anything to help. There is a couple that has adopted a daughter from Russia, and they were supposed to be going home to start settling in and bonding, and they end up stranded in Canada. Lots of fascinating stories. There's a man who is the director of Hugo Boss, who was supposed to be going to Fashion Week and ends up in Canada. It's just so interesting the ways everybody came together and supported them. These Canadian people were so friendly. They would invite them into their homes so they could shower or so they could get a meal and have good food. They would bring towels and blankets, strollers for people to use, and just gave so much because they knew what these people had been through and what they were going through, and they wanted to do whatever they could do to help. And it's it's very emotional. And especially on a day where what happened to Salman Rushdie happened, and in a time when just, pick a news story is going on, it means a lot to be reminded of the good side of humanity. I always say people will surprise you by being terrible, but they will also surprise you by being wonderful. And this is a book about people faced with the worst of humanity choosing to be wonderful. And I'm going to stop talking about it because I'm getting emotional about it again. What a day. Just, 9/11 already makes me emotional. The Salman Rushdie thing. It's been not going to get into it. It's been a difficult week as well. The week started off with some difficult news, and that's a little bit why I wasn't going to say anything. But I had a very slow start to the reading week, and that is why. So I'm going to leave it at that for the day the world came to town. I will report back in my next Friday Reads video where we will have seen the musical Come From Away, which is based on it. It'll be really interesting to see how they base a musical on this as well. I did not make a whole lot of progress on The Queens of Sarmiento Park by Camila Sosa Villada. This is the selection for the LGBTQ in translation read-along for August and September. This is really intended for August because August is Women in Translation Month, and Camila Sosa Villada is a transgender woman, and transgender women are women. So that is why I'm prioritizing this one for this month. The other one, Kiss of the Spider Woman, I will try to get to next month. But I'm really loving this book a lot. Where I left off was, since where I left off, the author and her story has kind of almost inserted into the book in a very interesting way. And I'm really looking forward to picking this back up and getting further along. Once I finish this, and once I finish my secret project, which I have not made any progress on this week, because once I started getting back into reading, I've really put a focus on finishing Mercury Pictures Presents so I could get into The Day the World Came to Town for obvious reasons. So that's why, even now that I'm back in the reading world, I have not made a lot of progress on the print. So once I finish my secret project and that, I really want to pick up the Love Songs of W.E.B. Du Bois again and make that my project for the second half of August. So that's the plan. I think that covers pretty much everything for this Friday Reads. let's leave it at that at any rate. So I'd love to hear what you've been up to this week, what you've been doing, watching, reading, whatever. If you have thoughts about anything I've said, leave it in the comment section down below. As always, I really do appreciate your time. I explained why earlier, but it really does make a difference, and I do appreciate it. So thank you for that, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.